Imagine a resume for a second. Just a single sheet of paper. But the bullet points on this thing are absolutely insane. The headline reads, Liberator of 6 nations. 6. Not 1, not 2, but 6. We are talking about Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Panama. It is an almost unimaginable achievement. This is a man who didn't just win a war. He effectively redrew the map of an entire continent. He went up against a global empire and won. He crossed mountain ranges that were supposed to be completely impassable. In his own lifetime, they were calling him the George Washington of South America. That was the level of reverence. It is a resume that is almost impossible to comprehend in modern terms. The sheer scale of the geography alone is baffling. You were talking about fighting campaigns that stretch from the sweltering, mosquito-infested Caribbean coast, then hacking your way through Amazonian floodplains, and then climbing up over the frozen peaks of the Andes. It is not a war. It is an endurance test that lasted for decades. But then you flip the page. You get to the final entry on that resume, and it is a gut punch. Died at age 47. Destitute. Exiled from the very countries he freed. He was hated by the people who once lined the streets to cheer for him. Wearing a borrowed shirt. A borrowed shirt. Because he didn't even own a clean one. And his final review of his own life's work, his own words were, "I have plowed the sea." It is just an image of complete and utter futility. It is one of the most tragic falls from grace in all of political history. How does that happen? How does a man go from being an incredibly wealthy aristocrat to a revolutionary hero, to a feared dictator, and finally to this tragic broken figure dying on the coast? That is the central tension we are grappling with. We are going to do a comprehensive exploration of the life, the massive contradictions, and the very complicated legacy of Simon Bolivar. Our mission is to understand the man behind the myth. Was he a hero? Was he a tyrant? Or was he just a man trapped by the impossible, violent chaos of his time? The answer might be all of the above. Before we descend into the chaos of revolution, if you want to join us as we uncover the true stories of history's most complex figures, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video to support History Titans. Now, let's start at the very beginning. And when I say beginning, I mean the lap of luxury, where Bolivar was not born into the revolutionary struggle. He was not a man of the people scraping by, far from it. If you were in Caracas in 1783, and you were taking bets on who would one day overthrow the Spanish Empire, Simon Bolivar would have been the absolute last person on your list. He is the 1% of the 1%. He was born into one of the wealthiest families in the entire colony. But to really understand his position, his world, we need to define a term right away: Creole. In the Spanish colonial caste system, a Creole, or Criollo, was someone of pure Spanish blood, pure Spanish descent, but they were born in the Americas. Their parents, grandparents, they are all from Spain, but they had the bad luck in the eyes of the crown to be born in the New World. These Creoles were the economic elite. They owned the land, the mines, the plantations, the businesses. They held the purse strings. But there was a glass ceiling, a very hard one. The top jobs, the really powerful political positions like viceroys, governors, high-ranking generals, those were reserved for peninsulaires. Peninsulaires being people actually born on the Iberian Peninsula, born in Spain. So you have this incredibly wealthy, powerful class of people who are effectively second-class citizens in the political hierarchy. They are the VIPs who aren't allowed in the control room. That is a potent recipe for resentment. And the Bolivars were the elite of this elite. You could call them the Rockefellers of colonial Venezuela. They owned copper mines, vast cocoa plantations, huge herds of cattle, and it must be said, hundreds of enslaved people. He was known as the Prince of Caracas. He had absolutely everything money could buy. He has the money. He has the status. But his childhood sounds like an absolute nightmare of personal loss. It is almost Dickensian. It was incredibly traumatic. His father died of tuberculosis when Simon was just 3 years old. He would have had almost no memory of him. 3 is so young. Then his mother died of the same disease when he was 9. So he is a full orphan before he even hits double digits. That has to fundamentally shape a person, to have all this material wealth, but no parents, no anchor. Officially, he was raised by his grandfather. And after his grandfather died, his uncles took over, particularly an uncle named Carlos, who frankly seemed much more interested in the vast Bolivar fortune than in the Bolivar boy himself. So he was a ward, and a wealthy one at that. By all accounts, he was a difficult child, unruly, wild. He would escape his tutors and run wild through the streets of Caracas. He was a handful, but there were two other figures who really raised him in the emotional and intellectual sense. The first one is his nurse, Hipólita. She was an enslaved woman, owned by the Bolivar family, and she became the closest thing to a mother and father that he ever had. She breastfed him as an infant. She cared for him. She was the one who comforted him when his parents died, and he never forgot that. Never. Years later, at the absolute height of his power, Bolivar wrote that Hipólita was his true mother and father. He credited her with his very survival. Let's just pause on that, because that is a massive contradiction right there. At the core of his being, he loved this woman as his mother, yet she was legally his property. It is our very first glimpse into the incredible complexity of this man. His relationship with race, with class, it is all tangled up right there. He absolutely recognized her humanity and her pivotal role in his life, but he existed within and benefited from a system that defined her as a commodity. He loved her, but he owned her. That tension between personal affection and structural oppression haunts his entire life and career. The second figure was his tutor, Simon Rodriguez. Imagine a character from a movie. Rodriguez taught Bolivar that the colonial system wasn't just inconvenient, it was morally wrong. He instilled in him this idea of looking at this vast, beautiful continent and asking, why should it be ruled by a tiny peninsula thousands of miles across the ocean? Rodriguez didn't last long. He was eventually run out of town for being too radical, for being part of a conspiracy. But the seeds were planted deep in Bolivar's mind. So teenage Bolivar is this rich, orphaned, conflicted kid who is secretly learning about revolution. But then, the plan changes. At 16, he is packed off to Madrid. The idea is, he will learn courtly manners, maybe get a military commission, improve his accent, and most importantly, find a suitable wife from a good family. And he does find a wife. He falls completely head over heels in love with a young noblewoman named Maria Teresa Rodriguez del Toro. This part of his story always feels like a tragic romance movie. It feels so out of place with the rest of his bloody, tumultuous life. It really was a fairy tale. By all accounts, it was a genuine, passionate love match. They married in 1802. He was 19. She was 21. They were young, beautiful, deeply in love, and incredibly wealthy. A golden couple. They returned to Venezuela, ready to settle down and live the life of wealthy plantation owners. And Bolivar was seemingly content with that. He later said that if things had gone differently, he would have been perfectly happy to just be the mayor of a small town, growing cocoa and raising a family with her. But history, or fate, had other plans. Just 8 months after they arrived in Venezuela, Maria Teresa contracted yellow fever. It is a horrific disease. She died in January of 1803. They had been married for less than a year. He was just 19 when they married, and 20 when she died. It absolutely broke him. He swore a vow right then never to marry again, and it is a vow he actually kept, despite having many lovers later in life. But this loss did more than just break his heart. It was the pivot point of his life. It catalyzed his political ambitions. It is almost as if grief pushed him toward a search for glory. He had this massive void in his life, this huge well of energy and passion, and he needed somewhere to pour it. Bolivar himself believed that if she hadn't died, his life would have taken a completely different path. If she lives, there is no liberator. The history of the continent changes. Her death created a vacuum that only a cause as immense as a revolution could fill. He had to burn his energy on something, or the grief would have simply consumed him. So he does what many wealthy, grieving young men did at the time. He goes back to Europe. He embarks on his grand tour from about 1803 to 1805. He travels through Paris and Italy, trying to gamble and party his grief away. He is trying to outrun the depression. And this is where he sees something that changes his trajectory all over again. He is in Paris in 1804, and he witnesses the coronation of Napoleon Bonaparte. This moment creates what you might call the Napoleon paradox. It is a very complicated reaction. On one hand, Bolivar was completely awestruck by the spectacle and the glory. He saw the cheering crowds, the immense power, the ability of one single man to reshape an entire nation. He admired Napoleon's military genius. He saw what was possible. He saw that a single, powerful will could actually move history. But he was simultaneously disgusted that Napoleon crowned himself emperor. To Bolivar, who was steeped in Republican ideals from his tutor Rodriguez, this was the ultimate betrayal. Napoleon had sold out the very ideals of the French Revolution for personal power and a crown. The story goes that he famously closed the windows of his apartment in Paris to shut out the noise of the cheering crowds during the coronation procession. He saw Napoleon as a great man who had become a tyrant. It was a lesson he would struggle with his entire life. That thin line between necessary power and outright tyranny. It is the central struggle of his political life. Right there in that moment. He hates the emperor, but he loves the power. He wants the result, but he hates the method. While he is in Europe, grappling with these ideas, he reconnects with his old tutor. Simon Rodriguez, the radical, returns. They meet up and they travel together. This leads to one of the most cinematic, almost mythological moments in his entire life. They travel to Rome. In 1805, they hike up the Aventine Hill, known in Italian as Monte Sacro, the Sacred Mount. It is sunset. They are surrounded by the ruins of the ancient Roman Republic. It is incredibly atmospheric. Bolivar, this 22-year-old widower, falls to his knees and makes an incredibly dramatic pledge. I swear before you. I swear before the God of my fathers. I swear by my honor. I swear by my country, that I will not rest body or soul until they have broken the chains with which Spanish power oppresses us. It is the moment of transformation, the oath on the Sacred Mount. He is no longer just a sad, rich kid looking for a purpose. He has found it. He has a mission, a singular, almost fanatical purpose. He returns to Venezuela in 1807, not as a wealthy socialite, but as a revolutionary conspirator waiting for his moment. But an oath is one thing, an actual revolution is another. He couldn't just start a war on his own. A rich kid shouting on a street corner is just a nuisance. He needed a crisis, a geopolitical trigger, and that trigger didn't come from Caracas. It came from Europe, from Napoleon again. In 1808, Napoleon, the very man Bolivar had watched with such suspicion, invades Spain. He deposes the Spanish king, Ferdinand VII, throws him in a gilded prison, and puts his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the Spanish throne. The Bottle King, as the Spanish call him, because of his alleged fondness for drinking. This creates a massive crisis of legitimacy across the entire Spanish Empire. The colonies in America ask a fundamental question. If our true king is in prison, who is actually in charge? They refuse to recognize this French usurper. So they form these local governing boards, these juntas. Ostensibly, these juntas were formed to rule in the name of the captured King Ferdinand. Their official line was that they were loyal to Ferdinand, not to the Frenchman Joseph. But for a guy like Bolivar, this is a Trojan horse. It is the perfect backdoor to independence, a chance to practice self-government under the guise of loyalty. In 1810, the Caracas junta takes a bold step. They expel the Spanish governor. The revolution begins. They send young Simon Bolivar to London to try and get British support. He is a diplomat now. The mission itself wasn't a huge success, as the British were non-committal. But while he is there, he meets a legendary figure, Francisco de Miranda, the precursor. Miranda was a living legend. He was much older, nearly 60, and he had fought in the American Revolution. He had been a general in the French Revolution. He had known Catherine the Great. He had been trying to free South America for decades. He was the most famous revolutionary in the world, and Bolivar convinces him to come back. He brings the old master back to Venezuela to lead the army of the new republic. The First Republic of Venezuela is declared on July 5, 1811, but it doesn't last long at all, not even a year. And the reason it falls sounds like something out of a disaster movie, with a heavy dose of divine intervention. It is Holy Thursday, 1812. It is the 2-year anniversary of the start of the rebellion. The Republic is already shaky, fighting against royalist forces, and then a massive earthquake hits Venezuela. And it wasn't just any earthquake. The ground didn't shake equally for everyone. It was a geological catastrophe that seemed to have a distinct political bias. The earthquake absolutely devastated the cities and towns held by the Patriots. Caracas, La Guaira, Merida. Somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 people died in minutes, and the royalist-held areas were almost completely untouched. That is unbelievably bad luck. If I am a superstitious peasant in 1812, I know exactly what I am thinking. And the royalist clergy made sure you thought it. They had an absolute field day. They went out and preached in the ruins, saying, "This is God's punishment. This is what you get for rebelling against the Lord's anointed king." It was devastatingly effective psychological warfare. The Patriot army started to desert. The population was terrified. They genuinely believed that nature and God himself were against their cause. There is that iconic image of Bolivar in the rubble, digging people out with his bare hands, absolutely furious at the priests and the superstition. He climbs onto a pile of ruins and shouts that famous line, "If nature opposes us, we will fight against it and force it to obey." It is pure defiance, pure will, but also a lot of arrogance. He thinks he can command nature itself, but in this case, nature won. The First Republic collapses. And this leads to a very dark and controversial chapter in Bolivar's story involving Miranda. The betrayal of Miranda. It is one of the great stains on his record. The First Republic is falling apart. Miranda, as the supreme commander, signs a capitulation with the Spanish to end the bloodshed and save lives. He then tries to flee the country, apparently with the Republic's treasury, maybe to regroup and fight another day. But to a group of young officers, including Bolivar, this looks like treason. They felt he surrendered too easily, and Bolivar, feeling utterly betrayed by the surrender, arrests his own leader. He arrests the man he begged to come back and lead the revolution. He and other officers arrest him in his bed and hand him over to the Spanish. Miranda dies in a Spanish dungeon years later. It is a horrible end for the great precursor. Why did Bolivar do it? Was it righteous anger at a perceived betrayal? That is the big debate. Some historians say it was justice for a traitor who surrendered too easily and tried to flee with the money. Others point to a more cynical motive. After handing over Miranda, the Spanish commander gave Bolivar a passport to leave the country. It looks a lot like he traded his mentor's life for his own freedom. That is a very tough pill to swallow. Bolivar was a man of extremes. In his mind, Miranda's surrender was an unforgivable act of cowardice. But the practical result was that Miranda died in chains, and Bolivar lived to fight another day. So Bolivar escapes to what is now Colombia, New Granada. He has failed. He is in exile, but he clearly doesn't give up. He is constitutionally incapable of giving up. He writes a famous document, the Cartagena Manifesto, where he analyzes all the reasons the First Republic failed. Too much federalism, not enough central power, too much mercy. And then he manages to get a commission in the New Granadan army. This is where he really becomes the liberator. This leads to the admirable campaign of 1813. He takes a small army and performs a blitzkrieg. He marches back into Venezuela, moving so fast the Spanish forces can't react or regroup. He recaptures Caracas in just 6 months. It is a campaign of breathtaking military genius, but it is also breathtakingly bloody. This brings us to the decree of war to the death. This is where the story gets really grim. It is a crucial turning point for understanding Bolivar's psychology and his methods. In June 1813, he issues this infamous decree. Spaniards and Canarians count on death even if you are indifferent, if you do not actively work in favor of the independence of America. Americans count on life even if you are guilty. If you were a Spanish baker or a shoemaker, someone who just wanted to stay out of the politics and live your life, you would be executed. Your neutrality was a death sentence. It was a policy of extermination. Why go that far? Because he wanted to draw a hard, bloody line in the sand. The war up to that point had been messy. It was a civil war, really. Families were split. Bolivar wanted to make the war irreversible. He wanted to sever the psychological tie to Spain forever. By forcing everyone to commit atrocities against Spaniards, there was no turning back. It was brutal. It was terrifying. And it was effective. But violence begets violence. And the Royalists hit back with something even worse. They unleashed the legions of hell, led by a man named José Tomás Boves. Boves was a Royalist leader, but he wasn't some Spanish general in a fancy uniform. He was an absolute terror. He led the Llaneros, the cowboys of the Venezuelan plains, and these Llaneros were rough, mixed-race horsemen who felt completely ignored and looked down upon by the wealthy white Creole elite like Bolivar. So this became a class war and a race war. The poor and non-white population didn't automatically side with the rich revolutionaries. Boves turned it into a war of the poor against the rich. He told the Llaneros, "The rich Creoles are your enemies. They want to trade a king in Madrid for a king in Caracas. Go, loot them, kill them. Their property is yours." And they did it. With a level of brutality that is hard to comprehend, Boves' army raped, tortured, and massacred their way across Venezuela. They were an unstoppable force of pure rage. Bolivar's more formal army was simply overwhelmed by their ferocity. The Second Republic falls in a complete bloodbath in 1814. Bolivar is defeated again. He flees again. He ends up penniless in Jamaica in 1815. This has to be the absolute low point for him. He is completely alone. He has had to sell his silver just to eat. He is living in a cheap boarding house. He even survives an assassination attempt, but only by sheer luck because he had switched places with someone else that night. And yet, even in this darkness, he is still thinking, still writing. He writes one of his most important documents, the Jamaica Letter. It is his brilliant geopolitical analysis of the situation. He predicts the future of the continent with startling accuracy. But he also makes a key argument. He argues that South Americans are not ready for pure American-style democracy yet. He says, they have been kept in political infancy by Spain for 300 years. They lack the civic virtue needed for a stable republic. He argues for a strong, almost dictatorial central government to hold the chaos together. He compares the colonies to a person who has been bound in chains for centuries. If you suddenly release them, they can't walk. They will stumble and fall. He is already justifying his future authoritarianism. He is a Republican who doesn't trust the public. He knows he can't do it alone. The British aren't helping. The Americans aren't helping. So he goes to the one place that might understand his struggle. He goes to Haiti. This part of the story is pivotal. Haiti was the first free black republic in the world. They had won their freedom through a bloody slave revolt against the French. The president, Alexandre Pétion, welcomes Bolivar. He sees a fellow revolutionary, and Pétion makes him an offer. He gives Bolivar everything he needs: money, ships, guns, even a printing press. But he asks for one thing in return. He says, "I want you to free the slaves in the lands you liberate." Did Bolivar agree? He did, mostly. When he returned to Venezuela in 1816, one of his first acts was to issue decrees freeing the slaves. He freed his own slaves first. But it wasn't just altruism. It was brilliant strategy. He finally realized that the only way to win was to get the black and mixed race population on his side. The very people Boves had used against him. He had to make the revolution about actual freedom for everyone, not just a transfer of power among the rich Creoles. So armed with Haitian support and this new, more inclusive policy, he goes back. But he can't just attack Caracas again. That failed twice. He heads into the deep interior to the Orinoco River Basin. He establishes a base there, and he aligns himself with a new leader of the Llaneros. Boves is dead by now, and the cowboys have a new chief, José Antonio Páez. Páez was a massive, illiterate, fearless warrior, the archetype of the caudillo, the regional strongman. He commanded the absolute loyalty of the plainsmen. And there is that famous story where Páez decides to test this delicate, fancy aristocrat from Caracas. He challenges Bolivar, and Bolivar ends up riding bareback all night long, refusing to quit just to prove he could hang with them. And he earned a rather crude nickname for it, Iron Arse, or Culo de Hierro. It sounds funny, but it was a badge of honor. It meant the city boy could ride with the cowboys. Winning Paez's respect gave Bolivar the one thing he desperately needed: an unstoppable cavalry. So now he has an army. He has the cowboys. It is 1819. And he decides to do something completely and utterly insane. Something that everyone thought was impossible. He decides to cross the Andes Mountains in the middle of the rainy season. It is considered one of the greatest military feats in history, right up there with Hannibal crossing the Alps with his elephants. The logic was simple. The Spanish were comfortable in New Granada, what is now Colombia. They felt safe. They were protected by this massive wall of mountains. They thought no army on earth could cross those peaks, especially not now. Bolivar's logic was, that is exactly what we are going to do. Surprise. Total, complete surprise. The march itself was hellish. He took an army of about 2,500 men. First, they had to cross the flooded plains of Casanare. We are talking about marching for weeks in waist-deep water, infested with leeches and piranhas. Their boots rotted off their feet. That was the easy part. Then they hit the mountains. They start climbing the Páramo de Pisba, up to 13,000 feet. These are men from the tropical plains. They are not equipped for this. They are wearing loincloths and light shirts. They hit freezing temperatures, snow, icy winds. The altitude sickness was brutal. Men were dying of hypothermia. All the horses died. It was a literal death march, but they made it. When they descended on the other side, ragged, starving, effectively an army of skeletons, the Spanish couldn't believe their eyes. They thought an army had literally materialized out of the clouds. This leads to the Battle of Boyaca in August 1819. A stunningly decisive victory. It was over in less than 2 hours. The main Spanish army in New Granada was shattered. Bolivar marches into Bogota as a liberator. New Granada is free, and this is the moment he creates his grand project, Gran Colombia. This wasn't just a country. It was a superstate, a grand vision. It united Venezuela, New Granada, and later Ecuador and Panama into one massive republic. Bolivar didn't want a continent of tiny, weak republics that could be picked off by European powers. He wanted a South American superpower that could stand toe-to-toe with the United States. He is the president of this massive new entity. But the war isn't over. Venezuela is still not fully secure. So he goes back. He returns to his homeland. In 1821, he wins the Great Battle of Carabobo. That is it for the Spanish in Venezuela. That effectively liberates Venezuela for good. Then he looks south towards Ecuador and Peru. He sends his best general, the brilliant Antonio José de Sucre, to liberate Ecuador. Sucre is another fascinating figure. The loyal, brilliant lieutenant. The best of them. Honest, a military genius, and completely loyal to Bolivar. Sucre wins the Battle of Pichincha on the slopes of a volcano. Ecuador is freed and joins Gran Colombia. The map of South America is rapidly turning. But there is a problem. There is another liberator coming up from the south, José de San Martin. While Bolivar was sweeping down from the north, San Martin had performed his own miracle, crossing the Andes from Argentina, liberating Chile, and was now in Peru, the heart of Spanish power. These two titans were moving toward each other like tectonic plates, and they were destined to meet. In Guayaquil, Ecuador, in 1822, the famous Guayaquil Conference takes place. This is one of the great mysteries of history. They met alone, just the two of them. No aides, no one taking notes. We don't know for sure exactly what was said, but we know they had very different visions for the future of the continent. Completely different. Bolivar, for all his authoritarian tendencies, was a Republican at heart. San Martin, on the other hand, had become convinced that South America was too chaotic for democracy. He wanted to import European princes and establish constitutional monarchies. A king of Peru, a king of Chile. He thought it was the only way to create stability. Bolivar would never, ever accept that. And there was the ego problem. San Martin is supposed to have said that two suns cannot shine in the same sky. He knew one of them had to go. He knew Bolivar would never serve under him. And perhaps he realized he didn't have the political or military strength to oppose Bolivar. So San Martin made an incredible decision. At a banquet, he raised a toast to Bolivar and the future of South America. Then he quietly left, boarded his ship, and sailed away. He retired to France and died in exile. He basically handed the entire continent in the glory of final victory to Bolivar. It was an incredible act of self-sacrifice for the cause. He put the cause above his own ego. So that leaves Bolivar as the undisputed master of the revolution. He heads to Peru, and it is there he meets someone who seems to be his equal in passion and fire, Manuela Sáenz, the liberator of the liberator. Manuela is a fantastic character. She was so much more than just his mistress. She was a revolutionary in her own right. She left her wealthy English husband to be with Bolivar. She rode into battle in men's clothing. She was made a colonel in the army. She was a spy. She was his most trusted political confidant. She was the only one who could challenge him. She argued with him. She laughed at him. And she protected him with her life. With Manuela by his side, Bolivar and Sucre finished the job. The final victories came at the Battle of Junin and then the Battle of Ayacucho in December 1824. Ayacucho is the big one. Sucre masterminds a brilliant victory that effectively crushes the last major Spanish army and ends the Spanish Empire in South America for good. As a final prize, they create a new country in what was called Upper Peru. They name it Bolivia in his honor, and he writes their constitution. This is where we really see his political philosophy solidify and where the trouble really begins. The constitution he writes for Bolivia includes a president for life. A president for life who has the power to pick his own successor. That sounds an awful lot like a monarchy with extra steps. He called it a monocracy. He genuinely believed it was the only way to prevent the new nations from descending into anarchy. But to the liberals, to the true Republicans who had fought alongside him, it looked like he was turning into the very thing he had once despised. Napoleon, we are at the absolute peak. It is 1825, 1826. Bolivar is the president of Gran Colombia. He is the dictator of Peru. He is the president of Bolivia. He has liberated 6 nations. He is a god on earth. And that is the precise moment when it all starts to unravel. He had achieved everything, but everything went wrong. Gran Colombia, his great dream, was ungovernable. The geography was too vast. The regional interests were too different. People in Venezuela didn't want to be ruled from Bogotá. The people in Peru resented the Colombian troops stationed there. His generals, the powerful men like Páez in Venezuela, and his own vice president, Santander, in Colombia, started carving out their own little kingdoms. Francisco de Paula Santander was the polar opposite of Bolivar. He governed Colombia, while Bolivar was off fighting in Peru. Santander was an administrator, a lawyer. He believed in institutions, laws, budgets, constitutions. Bolivar believed in glory and the power of his own will. They came to despise each other. It is the classic conflict, the warrior versus the bureaucrat. As Gran Colombia starts tearing itself apart at the seams, Bolivar races back north to try and hold it together. He tries to placate everyone, but he becomes increasingly authoritarian. He is convinced that only his strong hand can prevent total anarchy. And so, in 1828, desperate to stop the disintegration, he takes the final step. He declares himself dictator of Gran Colombia. The liberator becomes a dictator. That is the tragedy right there. His former allies turned on him. On the night of September 25th, 1828, a group of conspirators broke into the presidential palace in Bogotá with daggers drawn, intending to assassinate him. This is Manuela's great heroic moment in the Septembrina conspiracy. The assassins are at the door. They kill the guards. Bolivar grabs his sword and pistol, ready to go down fighting. But Manuela Sáenz realizes he will be overwhelmed. She physically forces him towards a window. It is a high balcony. She convinces him to jump. She confronts the assassins herself. She opens the door and stands there, blocking their path. She lies to them. She misdirects them. She tells them he is in the council room, sending them the wrong way. She buys him just enough time to hide under a bridge in the cold river for hours. She saved his life, and for that, Bolivar himself gave her the title, La Libertadora del Libertador, the liberator of the liberator. But even though he survived, he was a broken man after that, completely. His health was failing fast. He almost certainly had tuberculosis. the same disease that killed both his parents. He was coughing up blood, losing weight at an alarming rate. And politically, he was finished. Venezuela officially secedes from Gran Colombia, and then they pass a decree banning him from ever setting foot in his own homeland again. That has to be the deepest cut of all. Banned from the country you created. In early 1830, he resigns the presidency for the last time. He packs his bags, intending to go into a final exile in Europe. He begins the slow journey to the coast, and on the way, he gets more bad news. The worst news of his life. He receives a letter informing him that Sucre, his best friend, his chosen successor, the one truly good and loyal man he trusted, had been assassinated, ambushed in a dark forest in southern Colombia. It is just tragedy upon tragedy. The hits just keep coming. Bolivar is absolutely crushed. He reportedly says they have shed the blood of Abel. That was the final blow. He reaches the port city of Santa Marta on the coast. He is destitute. He has no money. His body is completely wasted away. At the end, he weighed about 48 pounds, 22 kilograms. That is horrific. It is the weight of a child. It just shows how ravaged he was by disease and stress. He was staying at the estate of a Spanish admirer. He didn't even have a clean shirt. The doctor had to borrow one from a neighbor for him to be buried in, and his final words captured it all. On December 17th, 1830, he dies. His final reported words were, "All who served the revolution have plowed the sea." Plowed the sea. It is such a powerful image of total futility. You work so hard, you push with all your might, but the water just closes up behind you, leaving no trace. He died believing he had built nothing permanent. He died thinking he was a complete failure. So let us unpack the legacy, because today, Simon Bolivar is not remembered as a failure. In South America, he is a deity. It is the Great Resurrection. He dies a hated exile, and then just 12 years later, his body is brought back to Caracas with massive fanfare and celebration. He becomes the symbol of the nation, the father of the country. And today, everyone wants a piece of him. He is a mirror. Everyone sees what they want to see in him. The left sees the anti-imperialist revolutionary. You think of Hugo Chavez and his Bolivarian revolution. They focus on his fight against foreign powers and his decrees to free slaves. The right focuses on his desire for order, his deep distrust of the masses, his president-for-life ideas, and his undeniable military genius. They see him as the strongman who could have prevented chaos. But when you look at the whole man, the orphan, the grieving widower, the brilliant warrior, the political writer, the liberator, the dictator, one thing stands out. It is the profound tragedy of a man whose vision was simply too big for his reality. He wanted to create a unified, enlightened, powerful South America. But he was fighting against impossible odds, against geography, against deep-seated race and class divisions, against centuries of colonial trauma. He was a man of the Enlightenment, trying to build a modern republic in an almost feudal world, and he failed in his ultimate role of unity. But he succeeded in the first part of his oath. He broke the chains. He was a man who liberated 6 nations, but in the end couldn't save his own dream or himself. Well, that is a lot to process. We have gone from the copper mines of Caracas to the freezing peaks of the Andes, and finally to a lonely deathbed in Santa Marta. It is a journey that really defines a continent. Before we wrap up, I want to pose a question to you. Do you think Bolivar was right? Was a strong hand, even a dictatorship, necessary to try and hold South America together? Or was he the architect of his own downfall, with his authoritarian turn? That is the question historians are still arguing about, almost 200 years later. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into a complex piece of history, make sure you subscribe to the History Titans channel for more comprehensive explorations like this one, because there is always more history to uncover. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time.